guest today is doing something pretty drastic that might seem a little bit out of place. It would kind of be like being a vegan on a dairy farm, or like wearing a Lakers jersey to a Warriors game, or being caffeine free in Seattle or gluten free in Italy. But all those things seem very trivial compared to what he's doing. Our guest, Jay Kim, is going analog in Silicon Valley. Jay, you're a brave man.
Well, thank you. I don't think I'm that brave. I just think I'm not alone here, to be honest with you. You'd
Is
be
that right?
surprised how many folks in Silicon Valley. Well, I think when people peek behind the curtain,
Yeah.
and they get a sense for what some of the technologies of our day are doing to us. So, but thank you. Yeah, being gluten free in Italy, that would be brutal. Yeah, it's
That
incredible.
would be tough. That would be very, very tough. Um, so I'm curious. You mentioned that, and I'm curious you hear about that. I'm with your message about going in, and we're going to talk about both of your books. The most recent of which, Analog Christian. How is that message being received in Silicon Valley? You grew up in Silicon Valley. You know the area really well. What's the reception you've gotten, and certainly your church, Westgate Church, but even when you people see people at a coffee shop, what's the reception been to that message?
Yeah, honestly, it's been overwhelmingly positive. And I think a part of it is because I'm not arguing that we should become Luddites and everyone
Yeah.
should throw away technology. Obviously, we're having this conversation via digital technology.
Right.
I've got my AirPod here and a microphone there, so I'm
Yeah.
not anti-technology. I'm just sort of anti what a reckless sort of leaning into technology does. I'm not so
Yeah.
interested in what technology does for us. I think that's obvious. I'm much more interested in what technology is doing to form us. And that question, I think there's really strong receptivity
Yeah.
and openness, and people far smarter than me who in Silicon Valley who are already beginning to do that work, both within the church and outside of the church as well.
Absolutely. And your kid, you have two kids, right?
Hmm.
How old are they?
My daughter's almost 8, and then my son turns 5 this summer.
Got it. 8 and 5. So, when
Yeah.
you envision a future for them with technology, and a lot of people who listen to the Aro podcast are families with questions like, "What the heck do I do?" and "How do I manage this?" And I love how you say what it's doing to form us. And not easy, but you think about what that future looks like. But what is the future you envision for your kids, for your daughter who's 8? In a few years she'll get a phone. Like, how are you envisioning when she'll get a phone, or how you introduce her to technology? And then how do you fight that battle of what it's doing to form us when she says, "Hey dad, everybody has Be Real, everybody has Snapchat, and hey, this is how they communicate." What do you envision for that future for her?
Yeah, it's hard. I think the thing that Jenny and I, my wife and I, focus on most is trying to cultivate a particular, appetite, for things. Um, Rather than just harp on all of the sort of dangers of digital technology, our
Yeah.
approach, at least right now while they're young, is to try and cultivate a particular aptitude and appetite for analog experiences.
Yeah.
So, we practice digital Sabbath in our home, where once a week, we try to have a full sort of day where we're completely unplugged. Typically, that's a Saturday. And typically, when the weather is good, which it typically is in California, we're outside, we're hiking, we're cooking in the backyard and eating back there, and try to be a front yard family and spend time with our neighbors and go to the park and take trips. And so we're trying to really cultivate that. We're trying to emphasize that we minimize digital experiences at home. And at the same time, I'm really, I'm cognizant of the fact that she lives in a very digitized world, and my
Yeah.
son does too. In some ways, I think pre-planning specifics. I mean, we do have some plans. We don't plan on allowing them to jump on social media, particularly like Instagram. I think the research and the data, particularly from people like Jonathan Haidt and Gene Twangy, it's becoming
Yeah.
really clear that I might as well give my kids a pack of cigarettes to smoke If giving them Instagram is basically as detrimental to their health at age 12
Wow.
as if I were to give them a pack of cigarettes. That's what data is showing us. So I would never do that. I would never buy a pack of Marlboros for my kids. So
Yeah.
why would I give them Instagram? So
Right.
yeah, we'll fight about it. I'm sure. I hope not, but I'm sure that'll. But but I think that the strategy for us, at least at this point, I don't know if this is right or wrong, is to just help them develop an appetite for things that are different, and
Yeah.
and for them to long for those things. And but again, my kids are only 8 and 5, so
Right.
we'll see how it goes. You got to check back with me in about 4 years.
I almost lost my coffee when you said I might as well buy her a pack of cigarettes. I almost left my coffee everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, I can tell you from experience, just in my experience, and my kids, in they may say they don't like it, but we've been really careful with them, and they understand. I think when you're building that healthy relationship with technology, I think they understand that. They do see in their other friends, the ones who are looking down and all the time and not really present. I think they do notice that doesn't feel good, and so when you're normalizing something, it sounds like you're just normalizing for them healthy relationships with technology. We haven't gotten the pushback we thought we would. We really
Mm.
haven't. Again, my daughter's 13. That day may be coming. She did put together a 14-page PowerPoint presentation on why she should have social media, which, but that's a true story. Um,
Yeah.
I hear something from pastors a lot, and I think part of it is rationalization, but part of it is a legitimate question. I'd love to get your take on this for any pastors who are listening. They say, "Hey, listen, I have to have it. I have to have it with me all the time. The congregation needs me. They need to reach me." How do you counter that as a pastor who you are there for the people, in your church? How do you manage that for yourself in taking a digital Sabbath, or, having a phone-free family dinner, or whatever those things may be?
Yeah, I mean, one, as a pastor myself, I can empathize with that desire. I actually think there's a very healthy side to that, to be available. I
Yeah.
think in essence, this is a different conversation, but that is the essence of pastoring. Pastoring is not creating great content, and I think digital technologies have sort of um, perpetuated a myth, that pastoring and being a pastor is about having great Christian content. I'm not against great Christian content. I just don't think that's the crux of pastoring. So
Huh.
when a church leader says, well, how do I do this? I want to be offline, but my people can't reach me. I want to make sure that you hear that's a beautiful sentiment, the
Yeah.
desire to be reachable. Now, where it gets dangerous, I think, and I see this part of it more often than the healthy side, is rather than leveraging digital technology to be reachable by your people in a local context, I see dangerously so many church leaders and pastors these days using and leveraging digital technology not to be reachable, but to expand their reach, which is
Ooh.
a very one way, sort of monologue driven exchange. It's like, I'm the spiritual guy, I'm the spiritual leader, I'm your spiritual guide, and here's my content, and I'm just going to reach the masses with it. Well,
Hmm.
that's great, I guess, but it's not pastoring. That's something else, and I
Yeah.
think that there can be benefits to Christian content for sure. I create I've written books, so
Sure.
that's a one-way exchange in many ways. But I do not think I am necessarily pastoring the people
Yeah.
through my book writing. I'm just writing books to try to provoke thought and help, you know. But in terms of my pastoring life, that happens right here with people
Yeah.
in our congregation that I see and know and share life with. I was in somebody in our church, a young couple in our church. I was in their home yesterday because uh, they're getting some tests done today because she
Mm.
thinks she may have, miscarried a child that she's
Wow.
had in her womb for a little while. Okay, so
Mm.
that's pastoring.
Yeah.
I would never ever imagine that, oh my gosh, this couple's going through this pain. Let me film a quick Instagram story and just share it with them, and I'll give some
Yeah.
pithy little thing about what, like, that's, I mean, I'm not saying that content would be bad. I'm just saying that's not pastoring.
It's misplaced. Yeah.
Pastoring is stepping into the pain, into the lives
Mm,
of real people. So those are two different things. So I would say there is a good thing in your desire to be reachable, but I would also say, um, without having to throw digital technologies away, I think it's really important that we get really brutally honest with ourselves and have a sober assessment of why it is we feel such a deep intrinsic need to have the platforms that we have, the digital mediums that we have. If it truly is so that people can reach you, great. Then put the appropriate limits there so that it's your people who access it to be able to easily reach you.
interesting.
Um, I would also say, even if you want to be reachable by people, you will not be able to offer anything of real substance and love unless you have limits on when you are reachable. If you don't have some sort of Sabbath, where you can recharge and be with the Lord and experience the joy and celebration of just being with God, then you really won't have much to give, even if you can be reached. So no matter what, I think even in terms of what you as a church leader or pastor are offering your people, having limits is the best thing you can do. So anyways, I can go on and on about that,
Mm.
but those are some
Well, no,
thoughts.
I love that concept of a real genuine act of love to the people in your church and your family is setting limits. That's real
Yep.
genuine love. Surely you didn't just come up with that line on the fly where you said it's not to be reachable but to expand their reach. That is really good.
Mm.
Is that an original line that you just came up with off the cuff, or is that one that's you've had for a while? Because that's really strong.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I've thought a lot about reach,
Yeah,
and how digital mediums are used to expand reach. But yeah, I've never said that line before. I just thought of it when you talked
dude.
about desiring to be reachable.
Yeah,
And again, I think there's a yin and a yang there a little
yeah, that's really good. That should be the subtitle of your next book. That's really strong.
bit.
My brother John, who's a pastor, he pastors in Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Mm,
Cornerstone Church. Check it out if you're in T-town. So
mm.
he talks about whenever pastors start straying from the local church and the danger of straying away from that, and you really have to, your warning signals need to go up if they are, to your point, if they are saying I am a pastor. If you're pastoring, when you start expanding beyond the local church, you got to be a little bit wary of that, because to your point, it is who's your real flock, who you're really shepherding. So that
Yeah,
falls very much in line with what you just said.
yeah,
um, Jay, I want to talk just real briefly about Analog Church, and I'm very interested in talking about Analog Christian, your first book Analog Church, within these two-part series, which I know they were kind of meant to be coupled. Which I believe you wanted Analog Christian first. Was that correct before? And then
yeah.
your
That's
publisher
right.
said no, Analog Church needs to be the one. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I'm grateful. I think
Yeah,
that was the right move. I just had it sort of backwards in
right.
my head early on. Yeah.
So the timeline is fascinating to me as I was looking at this, because Analog Church is why we need real people, places, and things in the digital age. That released 16 days after the world shut down, right? I mean, so we
Yes.
couldn't, and so in some ways it was so like to the heart of what everybody needed at that moment, but at the same time it was at the heart of what we really couldn't get right then. So can you talk a little bit about that dichotomy in that moment of you were talking about what everybody needed but couldn't access at that time?
Yeah. It was strange. It was a strange experience for sure. I remember going through, I remember calling my publisher and asking the question, should we delay
Oh,
releasing this book? This doesn't feel right. Basically, we're releasing a book arguing for the importance of being embodied when the best thing we can do for the common good is to not be embodied. This feels really backwards. But but in hindsight, I'm really grateful. I'm really really grateful because if there was anything I would have wanted to have said in that strange season that was, and in some ways still is, the pandemic and post-pandemic world, yeah, it was that book. It was that book, and
yeah,
it was a strange experience. But coming out of COVID a little bit, one of the things I'm really grateful for is that I think that season, that strange, difficult, painful season, um, gave us a much deeper awareness collectively and
yeah,
individually of, the longing that is in our body and bones to be with one another, that it is quite inhumane, to be isolated in that way. So one, I'm, most grateful that we can be together now again.
Yeah.
But two, I think that season, one of the strange gifts was that we felt it, we really felt it, that to
Yeah.
be isolated in that way and separated in that way, it's just not the way God designed us to be.
So amazing. An analog Christian, and I'd love to spend some time on this. So, analog Christian is cultivating contentment, resilience, and wisdom in the digital age. And what I like about that, so the three parts: cultivating contentment, cultivating resilience, cultivating wisdom. That comes with the other side of it, because you say that the digital age is inclining us towards discontentment, fragility, and foolishness. Will you talk about, before we go into what we need to cultivate? Will you talk about those inclinations the digital age is leading us towards, that discontentment, that the fragility and the foolishness?
Yeah. A lot of that thinking sort of accelerated for me during the pandemic. So I was in the middle of writing Analog Christian when we sort of went on lockdown. And I'm an introvert by nature. So when I realized, oh, I'm just gonna work, and ministry life is gonna be me at home, sitting in my room, looking at a laptop in the quiet and stillness of my home, I thought, oh, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna love this. But pretty quickly into it, like 2-3 weeks into it or something like that, even for me, an introvert, I was like, I cannot do this. This is
Right.
nuts. And what I felt bubbling up to the surface was discontentment, fragility, and foolishness. I just found myself with this sort of constant buzzing, nagging sense of ill will toward
Huh.
my situation, toward myself, toward, the people I care about most, my wife, my kids. There was just something about the experience that began really sort of undoing me. And what I realized was the pandemic wasn't the cause of those things. It was just a great revealer. This was all
Yeah.
stuff that was already inside of me, in large part because of my own sort of digital addictions and digital proclivities, that I was
Sure.
living and experiencing my life not only so much online, but that my online experiences were forming me, something we mentioned earlier. They were forming me into a very certain specific type of person, which, we can talk about that more in a moment. But there were all of these consequences of my own sort of the formative power of digital technology in my
Yeah.
life that for me felt like the best way for me to summarize it was, man, I was just a really discontent, very fragile, like easily offended
Mhm.
and foolish, just unwise in the way I was spending my time and my energy. So yeah, again, for me as a follower of Jesus and as a pastor, it all sort of circles back always back to the scriptures and what God has to say. I think the answers to life that we're really longing for, God has already spoken and given. And so yeah, that was the sort of initial journey towards seeking a resolution to so much of the angst I was feeling
Right.
because of my digital addictions.
And then the antithesis of those, and the first one on discontentment, is cultivating contentment. And I love what you say in the book. You talk about cultivating love instead of self-centric despair. And
Mm.
I read self-centric initially as self-centeredness, but there are two different things. Will you talk about that really kind of the gray area between self-centric and self-centered?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some of it is semantics, but the way I explain it in the book, so I didn't say self-centered despair because self-centeredness, I think, implies a sort of elevating of the self, maybe a sort of narcissism or ego, and I think those things can be a part of self-centric despair. But I think, for me, by self-centric rather than self-centered, what I do not mean by self-centric is we all think so highly of ourselves.
Yeah.
Some of us do. Self-centric despair, in comparison to self-centeredness is, hey, I'm awesome. No one can tell me otherwise. Even though that's kind of a fragile shell that covers usually a
Right.
very deep insecurity. I think what most of us experience in the digital age beyond self-centeredness something that's more universal if is self-centric despair, which is not necessarily I'm awesome. It's just an inability to lift our eyes beyond anything outside of the self. So it's despair because it's not necessarily that I think I'm awesome. It's just that I can't really seem to focus on anything outside of what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, how life is sort of orbiting around me.
Yeah.
And usually it leads to despair. It's this deep dark vortex that you can't quite get out of, and it's all wrapped up. I mean, the digital age isn't the only cause of it, but it certainly has accelerated it in significant ways. And it's connected to some other symptoms as well that I get to in the book.
Yeah.
Comparison, which
Yeah.
leads to contempt. These are all they all swirl around one another, leading to incredible discontentment. Because we can't seem to fix our gaze above and outside of just the self.
Yeah.
And it is despair. Despair is truly the word. It's just this never-ending vortex. You just keep falling down this pit, and but there is a path out.
Well, you're right. If I were to learn that if I were to believe that the world was all about me, if I were in my own, that would be a desperate place to think that this is it. Like, this is knowing my own. Not only do we have ambitions, and knowing there's a greater world outside of us is so comforting, but also just knowing our own insecurities and failures and shortcomings and all of that. If we thought that were it and that's all we're thinking about, that really it is a pretty does collapse, and which leads into the next one. It would lead us to fragility, and
Mm,
the antithesis of that is resilience, which resilience is such a great word. Rebecca Lyons, our friend, is releasing a book on resilience. And I
mm.
think that people are recognizing that need for resilience coming out of COVID. So this is perfectly timed here. Will you talk about that concept of cultivating resilience?
Yeah, I mean, uh, in the digital age, I mean, one thought that immediately comes to mind is we've just become so impatient. You just think about your digital experiences on a daily basis. You push a couple of buttons on your phone, and 2 days later, you've got a box from Amazon with whatever it is you wanted.
Yeah.
You push a couple buttons on your phone, and an hour later, there's a full meal delivered to your door. I mean, so you think about the way digital technologies have added convenience and comfort to our lives. I mean, that's all well and good, but it's also, again, it's not just what it's doing for us. That's clear. It's about how it's forming us. And what it's doing, I think, it's forming us into a deeply impatient people.
Yeah.
We no longer have the aptitude to wait or to linger or to hold slow and steady in any one particular direction because there are an endless array of options at all times.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, to live such a life is to become so intensely comfortable and to lean so intensely into convenience that any sort of challenge, any sort of obstacle becomes almost unbearable,
Right.
and thus we lose all resilience. I mean, you see this, in my wife is a high school teacher, and she talks about all the time how she sees this in her students. That there is just, and she's been a high school teacher for almost 10 years, and she's seen sort of the shift generationally. Obviously 10 years ago, those students were still a very sort of digitally native
Yeah.
population, but it's even more so today, especially coming out of the pandemic, where for 2 years, these teenagers' lives were just mediated online. There is such an utter lack of resilience. And that's problematic because at certain points, I mean, it is inevitable in life. We will face challenges and
Yeah.
obstacles. And some of the most important challenges and obstacles we face are going to be challenges and obstacles that digital technologies will not be able to mediate for us. They're human experiences that you, as an embodied person, need to engage and overcome. And, my concern is that we are losing our ability to do that. We're losing our ability to resiliently, with courage, move forward in the face of challenge. And, that's going to have, it's already having, and will continue to have, unless we begin to do something differently,
Yeah.
it will continue to have significantly detrimental effects on entire generations of people.
It's that line. Almost any obstacle becomes unbearable. It's so true. It really is, and I just find I was just thinking, I wish someone would follow me around one day and just write down all of my complaints so that I could make fun of myself at the end of the day. You know what I mean? It would
Yeah.
have to be all of this, just these minor obstacles. So, how are you building that resilience in your kids? I'm curious. The two of them, not just digitally, but otherwise. How do you? Because it's, I mean, it creates a real challenge for us as parents. How the heck do we build resilience in our kids when we also want convenience?
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know.
Me neither.
We're trying hard to cultivate patience in them.
Yeah,
We try hard to cultivate moderation in all things. Um, we try to make sure that we push them as much as we can. I was telling you earlier about digital Sabbath that we take, and
yeah,
on most Saturdays when the weather is good, we go on hikes with them,
yeah,
and we do that intentionally, and we try to push it a little bit, not to
yeah,
the extreme, but we want to make sure it's not just a leisurely stroll, that there is a little bit of, Jenny and I feel like we've done our job on a hike if and when there's a little bit of complaining
yeah,
that
yeah,
starts to creep in toward the end. It's like, okay, good, we're at that point. This is what we want, and then we push them. We say, hey, you
yeah,
could do it. Like, I know it's tiring. I'm tired too. Let's keep going, and there
yeah.
will be a payoff at the end when we eat lunch together afterwards. If we're a little more tired, that food's going to taste a little bit better, and
Absolutely.
have that, we'll grab an ice cream after lunch, and we'll do it
Yeah,
if we can finish this last trek of the hike. And so that's what we try to do. We try to instill a little bit of fortitude, in our
yeah,
kids, and that applies not just to hikes, but work that they do at home, and chores, and
absolutely.
things like that, relationships when things get hard. So again, we're our kids are young, so
Yeah. No.
I'm sort of all years at this point in terms of
Well,
learning.
I'd love those metaphors, the hikes to where you do go remind them, hey, you climbed when something else comes up. Well, you climbed that mountain when we did it. Do you
Yeah,
remember when we did that? And so then they start to
yeah,
believe that they are able. They know that they're capable of doing that. I don't think as parents we give our kids enough credit for what they actually can do. And then when they recognize themselves, and I have a friend, Chris Hart, who says their family motto, they say, we do hard things. And just by identifying yourself as someone who does hard things, like you'll naturally begin to do hard things, which I love. The
yeah,
third point is cultivating wisdom, which I think everybody wants that, but we are being inclined towards foolishness. We expand on the
yeah.
cultivating wisdom.
Yeah, people have talked at length in recent years about outrage culture. We just live in such a
Yeah,
culture of, everyone is angry about something. And I think it's leading to a sort of recklessness in us as individuals, but in particular as a society, that's utterly foolish. Like
yeah,
outrage is not possible. I don't think outrage, at least there's a healthy form of outrage when there's like a grave injustice, and we rage against the injustice. But
yeah,
today, what's happening is we're just outraged at each other. Anybody who doesn't sort of agree to the T on every particular idea or point, political or otherwise,
yeah,
we're outraged. And jumping the gun, so to speak, against one another in such sort of vitriolic and violent ways, maybe. Um, it's making us an utterly foolish people. It's very primal and animalistic. You
mm,
you go on Twitter or something, you just follow the thread for a while, and you realize everybody's
goodness,
just screaming and shouting at each other for no good reason. And what's so foolish about it is we're doing it digitally, where nothing really ever changes. We're
yeah,
just screaming at each other almost into the ether, when really the wise thing to do is to live a slow, steady, tempered, localized,
yeah,
embodied life. And in our foolishness, we're failing to do that, and we're failing to make a difference in real ways in the sort of localized communities we belong to, because we're spending so much of our time and our energy just sort of screaming at our digital devices.
no
And
kidding.
that's one example of so many examples, that I think we need to snap out of that, and
Yeah,
begin seeking much more localized, contextualized, face-to-face interactions. It's really hard to scream at one another. It's not impossible, but it's much more challenging to scream at someone when they're an actual human person in front of you
Yeah.
versus when they're just, a bot or an emoji on a screen. And so, again, I think embodied analog experiences are the path that can lead to wisdom in ways,
Mm,
and they don't always, but
yeah.
your chances are just much higher in
Yeah.
embodied realities, of living a wise life than it is when your life is mediated on digital devices.
Man, it is so true. The face to face, how that changes things. It changes context. Everything's different. I have a parting question for you. This requires a lot. I didn't prep you for this, so excuse me, but it requires a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of openness. I'm just curious if you, what's the piece of advice if you were a bystander to yourself right now? What's the piece of advice that you need right now that you would tell J Kim right now? What's the piece of advice you would give yourself right now on any
Oh
topic?
gosh. Oh my goodness. There's so much. Um, I mean, I just said it again, but I would probably remind myself, hey, slow and steady
Yeah,
wins the race.
yeah,
Aesop's famous tale.
sure.
I think I just, like many people today, I feel such an urgency, this sort of buzzing anxiety to, move on to the next thing, to accomplish more, to do more, to be more. And I just don't think that's what God looks for. I don't think that that's what God expects of me. I don't think God is interested in flashiness. I think he's interested in faithfulness, and faithfulness is often quiet and hidden, and it's often subtle and unnoticeable, and it often takes place in unseen places and unseen ways. So, I am often tempted to the big and the grand.
Of course.
And I think I would remind myself, no, that's not where the best things in life happen. That's not where the Spirit of God most consistently moves.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, there you go.
that's really good. That's really really good. Jay, where can people buy the book? I'm sure in all places, but and then what's your personal website, Westgate's website? We'll put all this in the show notes as well. But where can people track you down if they want to?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah. I just have a little website, jkimthinks.com, and all my work is there. And my books are on wherever it is you buy books, online. Um, yeah. And then our church, if you're ever in Silicon Valley, would love to meet you. It's just westgatechurch.org. And we're in the heart of Silicon Valley, right in San Jose, California. And, yeah, would love to meet you if you're ever around.
Jay, thank you for your work. Thank you for slowing down, for encouraging analog experiences. Everybody that's listening, please do go buy a copy of Analog Christian and Analog Church, both. Very enriching. Encourage you to slow down, do things a little bit differently, seek out those analog experiences. So, Jay, thank you so much, brother.